insight on this legal battle over GMOs, or genetically modified agriculture. We're joined by Professor Drew Kershen, at the law professor at the University of Oklahoma in Norman. Professor, welcome to Biz Asia America. I don't know if you were listening to that earlier, but there's some real uncertainty as to which way this case might possibly go. We know what has already been decided, and that's the current ban of it. What could happen next, do you think?
Well, this case is in its very preliminary stages, and the motion that was granted a few days ago is what is called a temporary restraining order in the American legal system. And what that does is it has the court issued an order which prohibits the Mexican government from granting permits for field trials of genetically modified corn. And they have, in effect, frozen the status quo so that no more field trials can go forward until such time as further judicial proceedings take place. It is my understanding that those further judicial proceedings are likely to occur in January of this coming year, 2014. And in between now and then, those who are opposed to genetically modified corn and the government who's been sued here, and the government and its agencies which have granted the permission for the planting of these field trials, they will be gathering their evidence and beginning to put together their case, and then it really will be argued in January. And at this point, it's simply not possible to predict what will happen, because it could range all the way from a decision that, in effect, somehow tries to ban or prohibit the federal government of Mexico from approving field trials, to all the way to
Professor,
saying,
I want to ask you about other countries, because it's not just about Mexico, and it's not just about corn. There's a great debate around the world whether genetically modified foods is harmful or helpful to the rest of the world. And some might argue that it's basically what we don't know about the impacts versus what the scientific facts that I guess Monsanto would argue over their testing and their debate over this. Is there a legal debate to ban something because you don't know what the impacts are? Because there hasn't been necessarily, I haven't seen it yet, but there hasn't been proof, at least from the other side, to say that these are necessarily bad for you in terms of health.
Well, the scientific consensus is absolutely overwhelming that there is nothing harmful in terms of the food safety of genetically modified crops. The scientific consensus is just overwhelming that these are safe
get that, but then
and nutritious.
What are the farmers going to argue? What are they going to stand on to get this stay to remain in place, or in your words, this restriction?
Their argument isn't about food safety. Their argument is a claim about environmental considerations. Their claim is about indigenous culture. Their claim is about biodiversity. These claims are not at all related to food safety. And so the arguments would be about environmental impacts, cultural impacts, and biodiversity impacts. And all those, the evidence is, since these crops have been grown now for 16 years around the world, there's been no evidence at all of environmental harm. And in many countries, for example in Honduras, where transgenic corn is grown, genetically modified corn, farmers have found it quite easy to maintain their traditional land races.
I also do need to play devil's advocate here, because if I'm sitting in France or I'm sitting in other parts of Europe where this is banned, there must be a reason why it is banned. Why does the rest of the world have such a big problem with genetically modified food?
Well, first of all, genetic modified foods are not banned in Europe. Europe is a major importer of genetic modified foods. What Europe has done in many countries is to fail to approve the cultivation of genetically modified crops in these countries. Spain does grow a significant amount of genetically modified corn, and smaller amounts are grown in several other countries in Europe. So it is not correct that Europe has banned these. To respond more specific to your question, the kind of claim that often underlies this, including the decision in Mexico, is what's called the precautionary principle. We shouldn't take action unless we have absolute certainty that something is safe. But if you adopt that standard, then it basically means that no technology can go forward because you can never prove anything. all things will have some level of risk. It's a question about how much risk are you willing to take. And the evidence is overwhelming in terms of environmental consequences that there have been no known environmental harms and from the cultivation around the world of more than 150 million hectares per year in something like 26 to 29 countries.
Professor, forgive me, I have to continue to play devil's advocate here, but some of the critics would also argue that not enough time has passed for these studies to be sort of, not necessarily validated, but over a couple generations of people eating this genetically modified food. What does Monsanto and what do people who support that tell them?
What is the answer to that, you mean?
Yes.
Well, the answer is we've had 16 years of experience and hundreds and hundreds of studies that have indicated both the food safety of this and the environmental safety of this, and that for those who are opposed to genetically modified foods or genetically modified crops, they will never be satisfied. So they will always say, we'll never know. It will be another 10 years, another 20 years, another 30 years. And it'll just always be a constant repetition. So the answer is we both have experience, plenty of experience, actual experience, and we also have the science that backs it up, that the risks are minimal for these genetically modified crops. And so this is primarily an ideological battle by those who are simply flatly opposed to genetically modified crops.
Professor, thank you very much for your insights on that absolutely fascinating topic. Thank you very much joining us from Oklahoma, law professor there at Oklahoma. Thank you very much.